how you're perceived by the people you work with, or you just assume they like or dislike something, or you assume that they're either happy with the way you operate or et cetera, et cetera, then you're on a slippery slope. But complacency is another thing as well. And we naturally, as human beings, we get a little bit sloppy, just like tiny little bit, like 0.5% every day, week, or month. But zoom out over years, and that creeps in, and before you know it, you are a lot sloppier than you used to be, unless you're constantly challenging yourself. And sometimes when you ask for feedback, it's not a very pleasant thing because you have to be willing to accept that that feedback isn't going to be like 100% positive. Um, so that's it's quite a brave thing to be able to do that. Yeah, it's lovely hearing great things about yourself, but to hear negative things about yourself, and it is a lot more difficult. But then you have an option, same as you have like on a Saturday. When I was at Sheffield United, there was a sign up somewhere that said, "You never lose. You either win or you learn." And can you adopt that mentality with your coaching? Like, yes, it might be negative feedback. You can go and cry and sulk about it and go and get a job at Subway if you like, but the alternative is, can you address things? Can you make some tweaks and some improvements to the way you operate? And a few years back, there was somebody who did some mentoring work with me, and they were like, "What I want you to do is let's pretend that today you're going to get sacked. Tomorrow, somebody new is going to come into your job, whether that's in a gym, at a club, wherever it is. Someone's going to come into your job and take over your role immediately. What are the first things they're going to do to refresh and to reinvigorate and to reinvent your role?" So you do that task, you go, right, well, actually, they would probably do this. They would probably plan my morning activation sessions a bit better. They would probably rejig my strength on my power sessions. Go like, right, now fucking go and do it. Do it yourself now. Like, sack yourself, then reappoint yourself the next day. What changes would you make to the way you operate today if you were like a new employee? Does that make sense? And it's a really good task to do quite like every month, every couple of months, just to really stop yourself from getting lazy, from getting complacent, from getting cocky, et cetera, et cetera.
I think it's a great task. And also, like Jordan just mentioned, a reflection piece is so important, isn't it? Because the nature of football, where we get into like a day in, day out, just churning out tasks, getting sessions done, and you get into a cycle of doing it, don't you? And before you know it, half a season's gone, even a few seasons have gone, and you've not actually done any sort of stopping and reflecting on things. And I think there's a few different ways of going about it. And I think that's one great task that people could do straight away. And you should be able to pick quite a few pointers, because even when you were saying it then, I was thinking about sessions that I run and put on, thinking, yeah, there's definitely ways you can reinvigorate it. So I think that's a great point to make. I want to go through, Mark,
Yeah.
your because we if we take you back to the questionnaire that you put out. Obviously, anyone that's not listened to the previous episode, it was 328, episode 328. There was 4 points mainly to the questionnaire, wasn't there? There was the personal side in terms of you as a person. There was how you communicated, which is mainly what we covered in the previous episode. And in this one, there's Mark as the pitch based coach and Mark as the gym based coach. So if we start on the pitch base, I'm just going to read some of the comments out. And obviously, these are all anonymous. So these are all players that Mark's either working with currently or previously worked with, but they're anonymous comments. So a few that have been said: he keeps drills and rehab sessions engaging and fun, good range of sessions, and allows a laugh within reason, which we might pull up in a second. I've worked with Prem staff, and their pitch-based sessions aren't noticeably better. Gets the most out of sessions he puts on, whether it's with 3 people or a full warm-up with the squad, pushes individuals who need it. And then, Mark, you can expand on this one. Mark does things his own way.
That,
What way is that?
I don't know is the honest answer. Um, So we were just chatting before you hit record, like hours of valuable content wasted. But we were talking about sort of like old school versus new wave, modern styles. I'm not a complete dinosaur, don't get me wrong. Um, but I grew up in the 80s. I started watching and loving football in the 90s. It was a very different era. I started coaching like 1998. I started coaching with like I didn't even have an email address. Like the internet, I had to be taught what the internet was like after I'd started coaching kids in various sports. So I've grown up like in an old school era, and I'm trying to find my way in like a modern, very quickly evolving environment in professional football. Um, so I suppose the other advantage I've got is that I'm not out and out a football person. Like I was chatting to a couple of lads that I work with who are both in their mid-20s. One halfway through his PhD, and the other one who's like got a master's, got 3 or 4 years of experience in the trenches, as it were. But they're both in their mid to late 20s, and that was kind of the age I was when I fell in at Sheffield United. It was like 2007, so I would have been what 25, 26. I was like, had I have stayed in football from that point on, there is absolutely no way on earth I would have made it to where I am now at 43. I think I'm 43. I was like, I literally I wouldn't have made it, and I definitely wouldn't have made it and have been still married for 7 years. Like I definitely wouldn't have made it and still have the relationship I have with my girls, and I wouldn't have seen the amount of them that I've seen over the few years, because if I had a pound for every person that had worked in the industry from their early to mid 20s, and then they get to 10, 15 years, there won't be many that go beyond that, because once you've seen a couple of stadiums a few times, that gets a bit boring. Once you've had to work over Christmas like an absolute maniac, when everyone else has got 2, 3 weeks off, that gets a bit boring. Once all the novelty wears off of like all the more stash than you can wave a stick at, and players you meet and places you go, etc., etc. A lot of those things get very boring very quickly, and then you're left with what is probably quite an uninviting, unsocial way of working that isn't as well paid as people think it is, or as well paid as it should be for the vast majority of us. So I think my kind of the advantage I've got is that I spent those 10, 15 years out of football working in similar areas, but then I've come back into it. So now I've come back into football with like 10, 15 years of experience of dealing with people, reading their behaviors, like stuff we talked about last time, solving problems before they become problems, all those little things. And I come into football now as a non-football person using these like transferable like non-football industry skills into the football environment. And like, I think that's what people might mean by doing it my own way. Like, if I was 25 now and I was desperate to work in football, and I'll just jump through whatever hoops are needed, and I'll do everything. I'll toe the line, I'll play the game, and I'll just be like dog eat dog. I want to get promoted and then promoted and then promoted. I want to go up and up and up, either through the leagues or through my department. I'm always going to have one eye on like another club that I can go to better myself. But coming into it now at my age, honestly, and I hope people don't take this the wrong way, I just don't give a fuck about any of those things. Like I couldn't care less. Like I absolutely love being at Cambridge. Like wild horses wouldn't drag me away from being there. There might be a little yellow canary that could tempt me, but that's only because Norwich is an hour closer to my home, if you're listening. But other than that, like I don't care enough about all of the other things. Like if my boss left and went on, I don't want his job. like I don't want to get promoted because I've kind of been there and I've done that. And so I think I'm lucky in that I care so little about all of the things that everyone else cares so much about that it gives me the freedom to just kind of do my job in a way that I think is the best way to do it at the time I'm doing it with the players I'm doing it with, if that makes sense. And that I've learned over the years, like my job title is physical performance coach. Like my roles and responsibilities include gym based and some pitch based, but mostly gym based strength and conditioning, sort of like power work and activation, mobility, everything that comes under that bracket. So my job is physical performance. But if you ask me what percentage of my job or if you ask me how to phrase this, like, what's the most important thing for a player that I can offer them? I don't think the physical aspect is the largest chunk. I think maybe the psychological, the mental, the emotional, the hormonal stuff that's all intertwined like a web. And if I just put all my eggs in the basket of physical and I neglect emotional, mental, hormonal, psychological. If I neglect those other areas, I don't think I would get as much out of them as I do. Doesn't mean I don't care about physical performance because I do, because that's what pays the bills and that's what people see on a Saturday. But I just think there's so many areas that are slightly neglected and untapped that can have massive physical benefits to the players without actually being physically um, demanding.
I want to try and put this the right way because what I don't want to appear, because me and Jordan talk about this a lot, and we
Yeah,
talk about um, the sort of positives of being in football, the positives of being in control of what you do in terms of what we now do. And I don't want it to appear on the podcast that we're talking coaches out of being at clubs because you've just mentioned there obviously the side of it where if you were to stay in those positions and chase those roles and chase the different clubs and all the rest of it, then that could have led to a very different personal life for you.
yeah,
And you've also referenced the positive side of it. But for me, what sort of stands out from what you've just said, which I think Jordan will obviously open it up to Jordan, but I think he would agree with, is that everything you're talking about there when working with players is actually having a purpose and making an impact.
yeah,
So chasing tracksuits, chasing the stadiums, chasing the match experiences, and all the shiny, the nice side of football, which obviously a lot of people get attracted to. And it'd be interesting asking like early stage coaches or students, like what is the actual attraction of working with in football? Is it that? Is it all those shiny things, or is it the fact that you want to work with players like you do, Mark, get them in the gym, get them on the pitch, and make an impact and improve them?
yeah,
Because essentially at that level, they've not had that experience, have they? They've not witnessed that. They've not worked with a player from a certain age to get them up to a first team, or they've not seen them come back from an injury and then thrive at a first team environment. So I think that'll be quite hard for them to actually understand. And for me, if I reflect on my time as like a student, I was chasing those shiny things. Like, I think that was the main sort of pull for football. And then it's only afterwards when you get the experiences that you actually learn the purpose and the impact is the bigger thing to chase. What do you
yeah.
think, Jordan?
Right, yeah, I think it was raised so many good points, but I want to take it back to what you said, what were the responses you read out actually, Ben, and
Yeah,
the one that said, I've worked with Prem practitioners and there was no noticeable difference. And I
yeah,
think that's a really important point to raise because again, if you're a student, you probably think, oh, I've got to work at the top because that's where all the best people are. But I think anyone who's worked in the game long enough knows that across football, the level doesn't sometimes matter about the level of practitioner that you come across. Some of the best practitioners I've ever worked with are not working in the Premier League. And, it's one of those things where if, like you said, Mark, not caring about the shiny stuff and actually just genuinely caring about the role and the players that you work with, lo and behold, you do that role very, very well and players really benefit from it and players feel really valued in that when you're working with them. And I think that's an important point to realize as well, that it doesn't matter the level you work at, like just care about the stuff that matters in the role, and that role will be excellent for you a little bit. But I definitely echo in terms of when you was talking about stepping away from football and coming back in and the experiences that you've had. I mean, we had Ben Thorne on the podcast talking about his experiences in F1 and the relationship he now has to build one-to-one with his driver Pierre Gasly. Literally lives with him, and he's been posting some brilliant stuff at the minute, going through their pre-season training. He lives with him, cooks for him, does everything for him, and trains with him. If you can't build those sorts of relationships, you're going to struggle. So, if you don't have to go and work in F1, but imagine a situation like that where you then go back into a football environment, like you said, Mark, your ability to create relationships with footballers is going to be exponentially stronger because you've had to be doing it every single day. And automatically, those players are going to value you more. So I think, yeah, some really, really valuable points that you've made. And yeah, the proof's in the pudding, like you say, that the players you're working with are turning around and going, listen, these sessions are outstanding. And I've worked with people in the Premier League and they know better. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and an element of that is sort of like, is it the session? Is the
Mm.
session really that different? Probably not. Or is it all of the baggage that comes with it, like the way you've made them feel? I said it last time. It's a cheesy quote, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, or words to that extent. And that makes a massive difference, especially when you're asking people potentially to do quite physically uncomfortable things. If I'm trying to push them beyond a level of comfort, I need them like I need them to trust me and like me enough to buy into that. And it's so much easier to do that if you've got all of those foundations in place. And just on this topic, when I first became a personal trainer in 2005, I hadn't been in the industry, or 2006 maybe. Um, I sort of like had this like wish list in my head of like aspirations of what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with famous people. I wanted to work with like professional athletes. I wanted to go to the Olympics. I wanted to write in magazines and newspapers, etc., etc. And then literally within about 6 months of working in Fitness First in Pontefract, guy at Cusford Tigers saw my little kettlebell sign and was like, "Oh, do you want to come do some work experience with us? Show the lads how to do kettlebells." I'm like, "I'm working with professional athletes." Tick. Literally about 10 minutes later, I'm doing a session in another gym. A guy from Emmerdale Farm walks in, he's doing his session, asked me if I'd spot him, really liked it. I did some PT session. Now I'm training a bloke who's on the telly. Like I don't know if Emmerdale still exists, but back in those days, especially in Leeds, Emmerdale was like I was like, it might as well have been bloody David Beckham who'd walked in, and I'm training him like happy days. I'm like mates with him, met him in like bump into him in pubs in the city centre, and people think I'm like a absolute legend because he's chatting to me. Then like through my link at Cusford Tigers, the guy moves to Sheffield United. I follow him along. Literally, the first day I went into Bramall Lane, it was a Sheffield derby, 3-2. James Beattie scores a hat trick. Everyone's happy as pigs in shit. I go into the manager's office, like his wife's loading my plate up with vol au and sausage rolls. I'm like, this is amazing. And then my boss introduces me to Kevin Blackwell, who's the first team manager at the time. He's like, "Oh, Kevin, this is Mark, who's going to China." And I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about? China?" He's like, "I'll explain in the car." So I'm like, "All right, fucking hell, I've got to go to China." Like, so in the car, he's like, "Yeah, basically, we own a team out there. The lad who's out there has got to come back for surgery for some reason. So if you want it, you can go over and take over the season. They've only played about 2 games. You can go out there for the whole season." I was like, "All right, when do I leave?" He's like, "Well, the plane goes Sunday." I'm like, "Fucking hell, it's Wednesday." He's like, "Yeah, well, let me know by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And like, if you don't want it, someone else can have it." So like, fair enough. Looks like I'm going to China. Get to China, and now I'm like working with an actual professional team in the Chinese Super League. There's an earthquake. The next day, Chinese chairman rings me up. He's like, "Mark, you going to Beijing?" Like, what am I going to Beijing for? He's like, "Well, the Olympics in 6 months. The ladies' football team need a bit of help. You're going to go and spend 6 months with them and like go to the 2008 Olympics." So I'm like, "Fucking hell, off I go to the Olympics." And during this time, I'm then like writing little articles here, there, and everywhere. My point is, the short version of the story is, within probably 12 months of becoming a personal trainer and having all of these ridiculous, like 20, 30-year aspirations for my career, I ticked every single one of them off, completely 100% undeserved. But I did them. And do you know what happened after? Fuck all. Like it made no difference whatsoever to anything. Like within reason. Like it gave me stories to tell, and it gave me good stuff, a little platform to propel me in other parts of my career. But in terms of like, no one really gave a shit because like I ticked all my lifelong goals very quickly, and nothing changed. So what I realized is the best thing that ever happened. I could have just like left the industry. I've ticked every box. I'll go and do something else. But what it taught me, and I've had this lesson like hammered into me, is about like happiness. And again, without getting too philosophical, but people think that happiness is a destination. It's like somewhere you arrive. So be like, when I get that new BMW, I'm going to be happy. When I book that holiday to the Maldives, I'll be happy. When I get that watch or those new boots, when I get this thing, I'm going to be happy. And then you get there, 10 minutes later, fuck all happens because someone has got a better car, someone's got a more expensive watch, someone's got a better job, won more trophies, and you'll always be chasing another destination. It will never, ever, ever be enough. Happiness isn't the destination, it's the journey. And if you're happy on the journey, it doesn't fucking matter where you end up because the journey is what like gives you a boner every morning. It's like that's what gets you going. And I kind of learned that it's like the best thing ever in those first 12 months to achieve everything I thought I wanted to achieve over a lifetime very, very quickly, and to realize that actually none of that stuff matters. What matters is that I enjoy it. And my dad had always said to me from a very young age, I don't care what you do for a living, just make sure you enjoy it because you've got to do it for like 40 years. Like, and having those sort of two messages in the back of my mind and having the practical first like 12 to 18 months of my career pan out the way it did means that now going back into football, like do I care about working in the Prem or in the Champions League or at a World Cup? I'm not going to say no if it's a good offer, but I don't need to chase that. Which again, tying back into these lads in their mid-20s, early in the careers, like nothing wrong with being ambitious, but if your ambitions and if your goals are just based on chasing a destination, then you might not have your eye on enjoying the journey. And if you don't enjoy the journey, fuck it, go and get on a different road and go a different way because you will be infinitely happier like on a journey that you enjoy rather than chasing a destination that you've just made up for no reason.
I think that's a really tough one for coaches to accept, though, isn't it? I fully agree. I fully agree that we've probably all done that, set certain things, hit it, and been a bit like, meh, that was all right, but it wasn't quite what I expected.
Yeah.
But saying to people that side of it and just take your time, enjoy what you're doing, can be quite tough. I think if people haven't had that experience, but I think that also ties in, Matt, with what we were talking about before on the reflection piece of careers of what we do, because you there have set obviously a lot of goals in one go and one by one tick them off. And I think what it means for coaches is, for me, two things stand out. I think one, set goals that are that big, they might not ever be reached because you can just keep working and working and working towards them. Then you're constantly on that journey then, whatever that is. I think that's a great thing to have, like a goal that's slightly out of reach because it makes you just strive and improve day in and day out. But also the reflection piece of if you do hit something, if you do land a role, it's important to reflect on the journey of getting there, but also then resetting something else because then you're back on that journey of achieving the next thing. And I think it's that cycle, isn't it, that just drives you forward. And that's basically what you're talking about that you've done, isn't it? You've hit those first ones, then you've maybe gone, okay, this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. Maybe I prioritize the personal life side a little bit more, take me back into consideration in terms of what I want to do, the hours I want to work, who I want to work with, and all that sort of stuff. Jordan's done the same. And then you set the next goal, don't you? Of, in Jordan's case, opening a facility or whatever it's going to be next.
Yeah, 100%. I can't disagree with any of it. Goals are really important because without a goal, you're just like, I don't know, crisp packet in the wind. You just like you never know where you're going to end up. And there's a place for that. Like I envy people that are a bit like that. To be fair, some because there's a lot to be said for it. I just whatever goal you set yourself, just make sure you've got a rationale for it, a reason for it. If it's like my goal is to work in the Prem, okay, why? Like, and do you remember? I think I might have said it. I either said it in the last podcast we recorded, or I said it in like the 3 hours of unrecorded footage where we spoke before we hit record, Ben. I talked about can you answer the question why 5 times? And if you can't answer why 5 times, then maybe like you need to think a little bit harder about it. Five is quite extreme, but I'd have this philosophy with like a session plan. Right, why have I chosen this exercise over this exercise? If the answer is, well, just because, that's not good enough. Can I give myself 5 reasons why? Or can I get that layer of depth and insight into why I'm doing what I'm doing because I understand it so well. Same thing with the goal. Whatever your goal is, why is that your goal? Well, because that's like it's the best league in the world. Yeah, but why do you want to work in the Premier League or why do you want to do that thing? What difference will it make after that? Obviously, that's an impossible question to answer because you don't know. And it's very possible that you can do something, achieve a goal, and it opens another door somewhere else. And 100% that's happened to me thousands of times. Like God, there's a draft around like everywhere I go with the amount of doors that keep opening, and that only happens because of what's happened in the past. Like that's not the doesn't just happen randomly. Like they those things happen for a reason. But it's just so important to understand why you're like really think about why that goal is your goal. And if it is a tangible object you want to obtain or a particular level or a place you want to get to, make sure that you're going to enjoy the journey enough to make it worthwhile. Because if you don't, if you're not enjoying the journey to get there, then no matter how many times over you get that goal achieved, it just won't do anything for you. And if at any time you're not enjoying the journey, change. There's nothing wrong with changing your goals. Like there's nothing wrong with sacking one thing off and going in a different direction. There's nothing wrong with any of that whatsoever. But just enjoy the journey because enjoying the journey will make you a lot happier than just focusing on the destination.
Jordan, you got anything on that?
I just think it's all golden information again. It's self-justification, isn't it? That's what can be really damaging for certainly I think practitioners early on in their career. Like you said, they go, I want to work in the Prem. I want to wear this tracksuit. I want to drive this car, like you say. And that justification of if I do those things, I feel valued, I feel worth it, and I can prove to others. But again, flipping it back to the questionnaire and stuff and what players are saying actually about the people who, let's be honest, make the job work, the justification of actually, am I improving players? Or the justification of, am I going to keep X amount of players fit over a season? Am I going to bring players back from injuries? Am I going to keep players happy just mentally and physically and like everything you've spoken about socially to really to get a unit? Like that justification is probably going to be more powerful because you'll, like you said, be more caring about that environment. Whereas if you're just forget, I want to get to X role in X club, like you say, you get there and you probably go, oh, now what? And then that's the issue, isn't it? But yeah, how have you found it when working? I'm going to bring it back to the two younger lads. When you've had these conversations with them and you said, enjoy the journey, and you said, don't chase a role, a title, a club, whatever. Have you noticed they change? Have you noticed their day-to-day habits changed? Have you noticed how they deliver? Have you noticed any changes?
No, I think I'm just they put me in the category of like miserable old bastards. Like like when you first, I don't know, the first time you go into a pub and there'll be some miserable old bastard sitting at the bar who giving you like life lessons that you really couldn't care less about hearing. And how many things like I'm a parent now. I've got a 5 year old and a 3 year old. And the amount of times I get flashbacks to 20, 30, 40 years ago, my parents saying things to me as a 5 year old, a 10 year old, a 15 year old, and I knew best. They couldn't tell me anything because I knew everything. And now I'm like, fucking hell, I wish I'd listened. Like, yeah, they were right about that. But sort of the caveat to that is like, it doesn't hurt to make your own mistakes as long as you learn from them. There's nothing wrong with that because sometimes that's probably a more effective way of learning as long as you learn from them. It's like you never lose, you win or you learn. But if you don't learn, then you definitely have lost. Um, so there's yeah, there's probably an element where they probably just think I'm chatting nonsense. But I haven't sort of sat down, had like a heart to heart sort of like let's analyze this last conversation we had and have you taken what I've said on board? I've like yeah, we've not gone down that route yet. So the honest answer is I don't know. But I dare say it'll be like in 10, 15, 20 years, they'll be like, oh, fucking hell, yeah. He was right.
That's kind of what I was getting at before when I said it's hard for people to understand that because I agree with you. I think that people have to they have to get them experiences and kind of make their own mistakes, and then it'll probably click that, oh, that's what Mark was referring to.
Yeah.
As much as because we've experienced that already, you want to speak to people and try not to get them to experience it or to have a different experience, don't you? To say, don't pursue all the things that I chased after. This is the stuff that's like will have real impact.
Yeah.
But at the same time, do they need to just go through all the stuff that we did? And again, it crops up in a lot of podcasts. We talk about internships, like the value of internships or working for free.
Mm.
Like God knows how many hours, but probably between the three of us, we've probably done a fair few years of working for free, like just clocking up hours of free work. But you, like you just said there, you're learning so many lessons within that time to take it into other aspects. So as much as we could say, oh, we don't want people to be free interns and it's not right for coaches to be going and doing X amount of hours for a low wage or whatever it is. Like we did it. And I'm not saying it's always right that what we've done in the past is the way forward, but essentially we did it and we made it work. And I think it teaches you a lot of things, doesn't it?
Massively, massively, it does. And I suppose, I mean, to be fair to how it operates now, and I've only got my club to go by, and the few clubs that I sort of speak to or know people that are at, but rewind 20 years, and you completed your degree, then maybe if you could blag an internship somewhere, but you would be post grad, you qualified, but then you go and work for a year for free, in your spare time. You might have like an evening job or a paper round or whatever kids do these days to get a bit of money. They're probably on OnlyFans or something. But you do what you've got to do to get some money away from your internship, but you're a grown adult who's qualified and you're having to volunteer for nothing. Like at least now, all right, we've got like 19-year-old, like they're still adults. But you know what I mean? Like they're in the middle of their degree, they'll take like a sandwich year or they'll do their work experience while they're studying. So at least then they're gaining the work experience and the internship like before they've qualified, if that makes sense. So that's probably like a good compromise. Um, yeah, and if someone had an option of doing like a 3 year course and then you're in the trenches with no experience, or a 4 year course where you spend a year somewhere, that is 10 times more valuable than the first option because it just gives you those. Even if, do you know what would be the most important thing? Would be if they did it all and they were like, it's not for me that.
Yeah.
I don't think I can do that. That would be the most valuable lesson that person could ever have, because then it would allow them to go off on another path. And I know when you graduate and you're 21, you think you're about to retire and you're over the hill, you're past it. But trust me, when you get to 43, you realize how much time there is ahead of you, even if you're in your bloody 30s. Like I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up now, and I'm like I'm on my way down. I'm closer to bloody death than I am birth. But I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. I just don't want to grow up. Maybe I do. I'll start there.
That's brilliant. Oh, where do we go from there?
No, no idea, mate. Who's on next week? Who's your next guest?
You're back, Matt. You're
I'm
back.
like, okay, there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Hat trick.
That's class. I've completely forgot what I was going to go into next.
It was the OnlyFans comment, wasn't it? The OnlyFans comment threw you
OnlyFans
off.
got me. Yeah, that
Still
sent
thinking
me.
about that. Yeah.
Do you know what I was going to go into? I was going to bring us back because obviously we've not mentioned it in this episode, but in the one previous, you talked about the presentation that you did to at the club,
Yeah.
and also you sent it over to me. And on one of the slides was a piano.
Yeah.
Talk us through that slide. What was going on there?
So yeah, my intro slide was just a picture of like piano keys, which obviously if I just send someone the PowerPoint and there's no context to it, would probably look a little bit strange. But yeah, that was like my opening pitch to the talk was something along the lines of trying to get them to understand the value of like communication and the way we use words and the piano analogy was the best one I could come up with, and it's like we all recognize a piano. If you like close your eyes now and think of like piano keys, we all know what they look like, and any idiot can walk up to a piano, start hitting the keys, and some noise will come out of it. Like that's easy. We can all do that. If you've ever been in a pub when you've had a few pints and they've got a piano in there, you can just whack it, headbutt it, like stand on it, whatever you do, sit on it, and noise will come out. However, if you want to actually learn to play the piano properly, you need to learn the chords and like the keys. And then if you want to play a song, like you're playing Frere Jacques or something simple, you need to learn how those chords like come together in a pattern. Then if you want to play something really fancy, if you want to go to the Royal Albert Hall and play bloody Mozart to 8,000 people, that's still hitting a piano and noise is coming out of it. But it's a very refined skill that's getting a very specific result out of the same instrument. Like use that exact same analogy with our mouth. Any idiot can just open their mouths and like words just like come out. It's like I'm doing it now. I've done it for the last half an hour or so. Like you can just, it's not difficult. We all know how to talk. We can scream and shout and we can just say stuff. But actually, if we want to learn to use our words to get a really specific and different outcome, then it's a skill to learn how to use them appropriately and effectively given the situation and the context and the environment that you're in. So yeah, that was the reason for having the piano there is like basically like we can all just stand and scream and shout on a sideline or in a gym on the training ground, but it takes a skill to be able to use your words like really cleverly and to get a desired outcome. Like, do people sometimes just speak for the sake of it? Yes. Or do they think about what they want the outcome to be? Are they thinking about how their work, how could I frame this in a way that gets an outcome that will be preferable to me? Like, how can I influence someone's actions or behaviors by saying something in two, three, or four different ways, and there will be different outcomes that can be really, really positive, really, really negative, depending on how you say it. Anyone who's ever had a relationship will be able to testify that this is true. I have it with my wife all the time where she'll say to me, I'm like, if you say it like that, it does my fucking head in. If you just say it like this, we're good. Like we're constantly like using words, but not necessarily thinking about what the outcome is going to be, like what are the consequences. Does that make sense?
It does, and I don't know if you've read it, but I was just trying to look here. Have you read Chris Voss's work, The Negotiator?
I don't think so. No.
So one of his books is Never Split the Difference.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't
Um,
read it.
so he's a former FBI hostage negotiator. That's loads of stuff that he speaks about in that.
Yeah.
Just how you speak, because obviously he's been in situations where you've literally got people about to blow themselves up or commit
Yeah.
some sort of serious act of violence or whatever it is, and he goes in as negotiator. But within that, there's so many lessons for us to take in relationships, in friendships, in coach to player relationships that we can actually learn and put forward. And a lot of the stuff he said was exactly what you just said there. What's the end goal? Like, what do we want as the sort of resolution?
Yeah.
And then how do we like work our way back to getting there? And if
Yeah.
it is like going in like aggressively into a conversation, it's probably not going to get you to the end goal that you wanted in the first place. You need to start thinking about what they then think of you.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think he says he talks about like mirroring their language and their sort of the way they're acting and things like that. It's really really interesting. I definitely recommend people to
Yeah.
read it.
It's fascinating stuff. And again, like I can't make this point clearly enough as I'm not a communication expert by any means. But I'm learning to be more aware of things like this. And through my lived experience in the trenches for many years with like average Joe blogs in a gym environment or with professional athletes in an elite environment, like I'm kind of there's loads and loads of similarities and there's loads of differences. And I'm sort of just like joining the pieces together like a jigsaw puzzle. Are you aware of Carol Dweck? Do you know her name? Like
No.
I want to say I think she's maybe a psychologist or something like that. But there's and again, if it might be someone listening who like knows this stuff inside out that will probably email in to say how wrong I am. But to give you the gist of what she did is she had like hundreds of children in the US, like 400 kids, something like that, primary school age, I want to say, if not like 10, 11, 12-ish, sort of around that age group. And she was like testing the power of words and how you can use words to influence people's behavior. And so what they did is they split the children into two groups, like that were evenly balanced in terms of their like intellectual ability. So there's brilliant kids in both ones, and there's like absolute dunces in both groups as well. Are you allowed to use the word dunce still? Like I don't know. I told you I'm old school. There was some thickos in both groups, and there was some like geeks in both groups, and everything in between. And then what they did is they gave them a test to complete, and the two tests were the same, of the same level of difficulty. And then when the children got their results, they gave them both 6 words of feedback. So one group, regardless of what score they got on the test, their 6 words were something along the lines of, "You did really well at this." So they've been praised for how well they did. The other group, regardless of their score on the test, got told, "You tried really hard at this." So they were praised for their effort. One group praised for their results, one group praised for their effort. But the children don't know what result they actually got. So then they give them a second test, and they give them an option to take the second test. Would you like to do the same level of test again, or would you like to try a more difficult test? The group that had been praised on how well they had done, "Yo, you were really good at this," most of them chose to do a test of the same level of difficulty they'd already done because they've been commended for how well they had done. So they've chosen the same level of difficulty because then I'm going to get praised for how good I am again. They're going to go down that loop. The other group who got praised for how hard they had tried, most of them opted for the more difficult test. So they go back, same again, give them the same feedback. You tried really hard, you did really well, or whatever. The wording might be slightly different, but get the gist. Then we give them a third test that was of the same level of difficulty as the first one. The group that had been praised for how well they had done and who had then opted to stay at that same level didn't improve at all. when they were retested. The group that had been praised for how much effort they had put in, how hard they had worked, and who had then challenged themselves on a more difficult test, and they had gone through that like a couple of times, then when they were presented with a test the same level of difficulty to the first one that they did at the very start, they performed better. Like they had improved, they had got better results just within, let's say it was conducted over a couple of hours, it might have been days, but within a very small time scale, the teachers hadn't put any effort into making the children better at passing these tests. So no effort, no teaching had happened. They just went through this series of tests and based purely on the feedback that the children got, no matter how clever they were, no matter how thick they were, the group that had been praised for how good they were didn't get any better. The group that were praised for how hard they had tried got significantly better. And it's like really, really fascinating to see the difference. I find myself with my girls, I'll do it all the time. Like they'll I know they're drawing and painting stuff, and they're like about, oh my God, that is amazing. Like, what the fuck is it? I'm like, what way up does it go? It's shit. I'm gonna stick it up in my fridge. My fridge is full of absolute dross that children have drawn and painted. And I find myself going, oh, that's lovely, darling. Oh yeah, it looks just like mummy. Yeah, it's brilliant. And then I'm like, fuck, I'm doing it. I'm
Yeah.
telling her how good she is. I need to sort of be like, oh, that's really good. Yeah, you've worked really hard at that. You've put lots of effort into doing that. And it's like it's really difficult because you find yourself so naturally going into, if I'm in a gym environment, oh yeah, it's good, lads. Yeah, nice. Yeah, love that. Great lift. That. Do you know what I mean? Like it's so easy to just think you're doing good by being vocally positive, but actually you can have a better impact by praising the effort rather than the performance.
I fully agree with that. I'm glad you brought the parenting side up. My kids are actually the same age. I've got two boys, and it relates. One of my boys last night, the eldest one, was playing football and he got some award, and he didn't listen to what he got it for because the coach basically praised him on effort, um,
Right.
and said he got the award from effort. He got home and told everyone it's because he scored 10 goals. And it's kind of the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what they hear. But I fully agree. I think there's lessons there to take into like what you mentioned there with players as well. Um, because especially within the gym environment, you're going to have players that are going to have more gym experience that essentially are performing in the gym at a higher level. They're more competent movers, or they might be stronger, they might be more powerful, they might be exerting more force, or whatever it is. But then you'll have players that have got maybe less experience or not quite the same level again in the gym as those. But it's important that we use that what you just spoke about with those players to drive
Yeah.
them on, isn't it? I think it's a great point. It crosses over really nicely into the gym work as well.
And do you know what? Like, shall I think carefully before I say this, or shall I just run at it like a bull in a china shop? Like, if you think about really big, expensive academies, like centers of excellence. All the big clubs will have like all the facilities in the world that you can imagine, the best of everything, and they'll have like very, very, very good players. Um, I wonder, and I've got this is anecdotal. I don't think I've got like hard evidence to prove or justify this, but it's a suspicion that, and my suspicion is based on if I ever work with lads who have grown up in that environment, but they've never kicked on to become internationals, like 500 Premier League appearances, like they're not getting 80 million pound moves to Champions League clubs. Like they just they have a taste of it and then they disappear out the bottom. And I wonder whether if you get too much too soon and all you're ever told is how brilliant you are and how good you are, and if all of the feedback you receive is based on your results, not on how much effort you're putting in, does that potentially subliminally give some athletes permission to take their foot off the gas a little bit and what got them there doesn't, like, they're not capable of then going to the next level. Like there's another book I read, a guy called Rasmus Ankerson, as an ex-pro, but I think he got a really bad injury at about 18, 19, so never really actually played professionally. He's a Danish guy, and he went and lived in lots of different areas of the world that are renowned. Is it called the gold mine effect? So he
Mm.
goes and lives in different countries that are renowned for like real, like being hotbeds of talent. And one of the places he went to was Jamaica for sprinters. And he's basically like, right, I'm gonna go and live in Jamaica and I'm gonna observe how they train and what they do. Why is it that a tiny little island with such a low population has got such a ridiculously high percentage of like Olympic gold medals in sprint events? And one of the things that, again, I'm going back from like 9, 10 years of memory from reading it, but one of the things was about like they had never changed the track that they train on. And the guy who was the coach, like they, all of their stuff is in like a rusty old tin hut and they don't have incredible facilities. And his philosophy was that, like, with all the money in the world that's coming into that environment, but they kept the facilities shit because he's like, that's what makes them work hard to get out of here. And then if they can do it here on this grass track, put them in spikes on a bloody track in the Olympics, of course they perform better. So I might be wrong, and I'm not slagging off Premier League academies, especially not if any of them want to employ me. But but do you know what I mean? Like I was like,
Going against everything you said before that.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, I like I'll go anywhere for money. In fact, I need to go now, like, to make it for the afternoon. But the like, can we spoil young athletes too much environmentally? But can we also spoil them like verbally? Are we praising them for how good they are, not for how hard they work? You know, they say like, how's it go? Hard work beats talent if talent doesn't work hard. Never is that truer than if you see some lads who have had a little sniff around the Prem and now they're working their way down, Champ League One, League Two, into the national leagues, and they've been there and they've done it, but why didn't you make it? Like, what is there something about the effort? Might be on the player, might be that player deliberately didn't put the effort in, but could it be on us as the coaches that have thought we've got their best interests at heart? We're doing what we think comes naturally. We're praising them for how good they were, how brilliant that goal was, etc., etc. Could we have got a better result if we understood the power of words and how our words could influence them to then yield a slightly different outcome? And the jury are probably out. There might be people that listen to this and say, "What a load of shit," but it's worth considering. And there's numerous, the Carol Dweck example that I gave you. There's numerous other examples. Hotel chain in America that were asking people to recycle their towels, and they had like a sign up saying, "Please recycle your towels." Like, no one gives a fuck. Leave the towel on the floor. I'll have a new towel every day. Then they put a slightly different message saying something along the lines of, 75% of people who stay in this hotel recycle their towels, and they noticed a little increase in how often people recycled their towels. Then they changed it again. They made it even more specific to something like specific to the room. So 80% of people who have stayed in room 12 recycled their towels. And then it jumped even more to the response to how many people reused their towels and recycled them. So there was something like a 15% increase in the amount of people that reused their towels throughout the test period in this chain that happened all over America. 15% is massive. Like, we work in an industry where like 1% are like phenomenal. I listened to a keynote at an event once. There was a guy who had been working at the Beijing Olympics with Team GB. And I think he had worked with something like 8 gold medalists in the velodrome and on the track. And he said, like, the difference in time between those 8 gold medals and the 8 silver medals collectively was less than a second. It's like that is like literally like what 0.125 seconds. Like if you have got like an old Casio one, if I try and I got 0.14, like that's quicker than that. The difference between gold and silver 8 times over. We work in an environment and an industry where minimal improvements in like percentage improvements can have a maximal impact. So if you can use words and people can prove that your choice of words and your use of words can have a 10, 15, 20, 40, 50% improvement in someone's ability to do a task without ever actually making them better at that task, then that says to me, although my job is a physical performance coach, there's a hell of a lot to be gained away from the physical elements of what I get paid for.
Definitely. I think everything you mentioned there about academies as well is fascinating around like the environments and yeah, what we can impact as a coach. I think there's definitely something in that. It made me think a few years ago, I can't remember what year it was, but at least a couple of years ago when I went to the FA Youth Cup final at Old Trafford, and it was Forest against United, and there was maybe 70,000 fans there. And I went with a coach, a good mate of ours, Wayne Richardson, and we were having a chat when we were there. And I said, the mad thing is, some of these players will never play in front of this crowd ever again. This is the biggest game they will play in because they'll do exactly what you mentioned, Mark, and they'll start to come out the academy and drop through the leagues. That's just the facts, isn't it, on what happens with academy players? And
Yeah.
sometimes it is built up to the fact that what is the level of support that we are giving them and how are we communicating with them? Are we continually driving them, or are we saying, "Wow, guys, you've got to a cup final, you've played in front of 70,000 fans, like essentially you've made it," when they've not played a first team game.
Mm.
So yeah, it's really really interesting. I think that whole topic could be podcasting in itself. And mate, we're over an hour now, so we're going to have to get you back for a hat trick, I think, because this is. I don't feel like we've touched on everything that we set out for in this one. But what I would say is, can you wrap it up with, you're going to talk about, and you've referenced it already, but the principles of influence and persuasion. So can you just take us into that slide and just for the last couple of minutes, just in terms of what you spoke about with that?
Yeah. Okay. A guy called Dr. Robert Cialdini, Cialdini, based over in the States, and he's done a lot of work with sort of like how to influence people's behaviors. Um, Now, like say influence slash manipulate. Like obviously there's an ethical line where we don't want to be like manipulating people in a negative way, but I suppose it depends what the outcome is that you want it to be. So let's assume we want the outcome to be we want to produce better, more effective football players. So these principles of influence are used largely. I became aware of them